Picture this. It is the year 1649. You are aboard a wooden sailing ship, pitching and rolling violently in the middle of the dark, unforgiving North Sea. A brutal, terrifying squall has descended completely out of nowhere. The kind of sudden tempest that makes seasoned 17th century sailors cross themselves and mutter frantic prayers to saints they haven't spoken to in years. The captain of this groaning, splintering vessel is desperate and terrified. He fights his way below decks, searching for a very specific passenger. He violently breaks down the door to this man's cabin. The passenger is not there, but the room is not empty. Standing there, illuminated only by the dim, swaying light of a lantern, is a little girl. But she isn't human. She is a moving, whirring, mechanical automaton, intricately constructed of gears and clockwork, stepping toward the captain with a lifeless, relentless precision. Convinced that this unholy, deeply creeping thing is a work of dark magic and the exact reason the heavens are punishing his ship, the captain grabs the mechanical girl. He drags her up the stairs to the deck and hurls her over the side into the freezing, churning black water. The passenger the captain was searching for, the man who supposedly built this clockwork child in the darkness of his cabin, was none other than René Descartes, the man we collectively remember as the father of modern philosophy. And the robot, according to the widespread whispers of the time, was rumored to be a mechanical clone of his own deceased 5-year-old daughter, Francine. If that cinematic legend shatters the image you hold of the ultimate architect of cold, hard logic, you are not alone. We picture the author of I Think, Therefore I Am, sitting quietly in a study, completely detached from the messiness of human emotion. But the reality of his life reads less like a dusty textbook and more like a gothic thriller. If uncovering the hidden, tragic, and profound truths behind history's greatest figures fascinates you, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Welcome to Legendary Lives Unveiled. The sheer volume of paradoxes in the life of René Descartes is staggering. Here is the quintessential rationalist, a man who demanded absolute, flawless mathematical certainty in all things, yet claimed his entire philosophical mission was handed down to him in a series of mystical, feverish dreams. He was a devout, practicing Catholic who spent his entire adult life absolutely terrified of the Inquisition. He was a famously celibate, reclusive thinker who hid a secret family from the world. And his tragic death in a freezing Swedish castle left behind a centuries-old trail of evidence pointing directly toward assassination. To understand how his ideas revolutionized the world and why they were considered so dangerous that they had to be hidden, we must start at the beginning. We must look at the intense personal grief, religious terror, and historical chaos that forced him to literally tear down every single piece of human knowledge and attempt to rebuild reality from the ground up. That reconstruction begins with a foundation of extreme physical fragility. René Descartes was born on March 31st, 1596, into a minor noble family in the little French town of La Haye, a town known today as Descartes. His father was a lawyer in the provincial parliament, but René's early life was defined by loss. His mother, Jeanne, died just over a year after his birth, and René inherited her frail constitution. He was incredibly pale, perpetually sickly, and developed a persistent, dry, hacking cough. The doctors essentially told his family not to expect the boy to survive into adulthood, with his father constantly away for political work. René was raised primarily by his grandmother and a nurse. He wasn't out running in the fields with other children. He was coddled, protected, and left entirely to his own thoughts. When he finally went to school at the age of 10, He was sent to the Jesuit College of La Flèche, an elite, newly established institution under the direct patronage of King Henry IV. This was the absolute pinnacle of European education at the time. Yet, because of his severe health issues, the rectors granted him a special dispensation. He was allowed to stay in bed until late in the morning, while all the other students had to rise at dawn. This permission to lie in bed and just think became the defining habit of his entire life. But what he studied at La Flèche is the great irony of his youth. He studied the classics, the humanities, and most importantly, Aristotelian scholasticism. This was the dominant intellectual and scientific framework of the Middle Ages, heavily endorsed and interwoven with the theology of the Catholic Church. Yet, Descartes later famously claimed that he gained nothing from his elite education, but an increasing recognition of his own profound ignorance. He wasn't being humble. He was looking at the actual mechanics of Aristotelian scholasticism and seeing an elaborate system built entirely on sand. Aristotelian physics wasn't about math or equations. It was about inherent purposes, what Aristotle called final causes or teleology. In this view, every object in the universe had an internal desire. If you dropped a rock, an Aristotelian wouldn't say, "Gravity accelerates the mass at 9.8 meters per second squared." They would say the rock falls because it is made of the element of earth, and the element of earth inherently desires to return to its natural resting place. The center of the universe, the center of the earth. Fire rises because it desires to reach the celestial sphere. It was a qualitative physics relying on hidden, mystical qualities. A heavy object falls faster simply because it has more earthiness, and therefore a stronger desire to reach the ground. Descartes realized this was just poetry, disguised as science. It was a contradictory morass of opinions where nothing could be measured, nothing could be definitively proven, and every debate ended simply by citing an older authority. For a mind that craved absolute certainty, listening to monks debate the hidden desires of inanimate objects was maddening. Except for one subject, mathematics. When he studied algebra and geometry, he didn't find debates about hidden desires. He found firm, solid truth. 2 + 2 is always 4. The interior angles of a triangle always add up to 180 degrees. Mathematics didn't rely on the authority of Aristotle or the Pope. It relied on clear, undeniable, logical deduction. That realization was the absolute seed of his genius. It led him to invent the Cartesian coordinate system, the X and Y axis. Before Descartes, algebra and geometry were completely separate disciplines that didn't interact. Algebra solved equations, geometry drew shapes. But Descartes realized that by creating a grid with a horizontal x-axis and a vertical y-axis, you could take an algebraic equation and draw it as a line or a curve. You could translate pure numbers into physical space, and physical space into pure numbers. He literally built the bridge between math and reality. The staggering philosophical implication was that the physical world, space, distance, motion, could be entirely understood through numbers, without needing hidden desires or teleology. The universe might just be a giant mathematical machine. But he didn't immediately publish this breakthrough. To appease his father, he earned a law degree from the University of Poitiers in 1616, but completely refused to practice law. Declaring he was done with the dusty books of the academies, he chose to read the great book of the world, a romanticized way of saying he packed his bags and joined the army. In 1618, he traveled to the Dutch Republic and enlisted in the peacetime army of Maurice of Nassau. As a gentleman soldier, an unpaid volunteer, He used the military encampments to travel Europe and meet other intellectuals. In the town of Breda, he met Isaac Beeckman, an older, intensely curious Dutch scientist who became the ultimate catalyst. Beeckman pushed Descartes with complex mathematical problems and introduced him to mechanical philosophy, the idea that the physical world operates strictly mechanically through the collision of microscopic particles. Beeckman showed him that math could be applied to acoustics, fluid dynamics, and falling bodies. He showed Descartes that his mathematics could be the key to finally replacing Aristotle. But to tear down the entire history of Western thought, you need a mandate. This brings us to the most bizarre, pivotal night in the history of philosophy. It is late 1619. Descartes is now stationed in Germany with the Catholic army of the Duke of Bavaria, just as the 30 Years' War is beginning to tear Europe apart. In the dead of a brutal, freezing winter, stationed in a town debated by historians to be either Ulm or Neuburg, he does something drastic to survive the cold. He shuts himself inside a poêle, a very small, heavily insulated room heated by a large central ceramic stove. It was a localized sensory deprivation tank, intensely hot, stiflingly claustrophobic, and completely silent except for the crackling fire. Imagine this 23-year-old prodigy locked alone in a tiny dark oven. He had been feverishly working on mathematical physics for weeks, barely eating, barely sleeping, his brain entirely consumed by the construction of the universe. He later wrote in his journal that his overheated mind caught fire. On the night of November 10th, 1619, he finally collapses into sleep and experiences 3 distinct, world-shattering dreams. These were the mythological origin story of the Enlightenment. In the first dream, he is caught in a violent whirlwind on a street, terrified by phantoms and crippled by a severe weakness in his right leg that forces him to lean heavily to his left. The wind violently throws him against a church wall. Then, someone yells out about receiving a melon from a foreign land. He wakes up in a cold sweat, prays for hours, and falls back asleep. The second dream is brief, but violently intense. He is awakened by a sharp, deafening thunderclap right inside the tiny room, and sees the dark stoveroom filled with thousands of scintillating sparks of fire. Modern sleep researchers propose this perfectly. Matches the clinical description of exploding head syndrome, a harmless but terrifying, massive, spontaneous paroxysm of neuronal activity in the auditory and visual cortexes. His exhausted, dehydrated, sleep-deprived brain misfired, generating a massive hallucination that he interpreted as a cosmic event. In the final, calm dream, he sees a dictionary representing all sciences and an anthology of Latin poetry representing philosophy and revelation. He opens the poetry book to a specific line from the ancient Roman poet Ausonius, Quod vitae sectibor iter? What path shall I take in life? An unknown man hands him a paper reading est et non, yes and no, and then everything fades to nothingness. When Descartes awoke, he did not stretch and find breakfast. He lay in the dark and made a decision that altered human history. He interpreted these dreams as a direct, undeniable divine mandate. The Spirit of Truth had descended upon him to reveal his destiny, to sweep away all ancient philosophies and unify human knowledge under a single method of mathematical reason. He emerged from that German stoveroom, a man possessed by a singular, dangerous mission. But having a mission is one thing. Surviving long enough to write it down while dodging the Catholic Inquisition is quite another. He knew he could not simply walk into the University of Paris or a piazza in Rome and announce that Aristotle was wrong, that the Church's physics were flawed, and that the universe was just a math equation. The Inquisition was very real, very powerful, and highly intolerant of anyone who disrupted the theological order. He needed a place to hide, a laboratory where he could think without a cardinal looking over his shoulder. Looking at the geopolitical map of Europe in the late 1620s, he made the only logical choice. In 1628, Descartes moved to the Dutch Republic. He didn't just visit. He lived there in self-imposed exile for over 20 years. To throw people off his trail, he changed his address constantly, living in at least 18 different residences. From the bustling streets of Amsterdam and Leiden to Utrecht, Eggen, and Andenhoef, he moved from major cities to quiet rural estates. He adopted a personal motto from the Roman poet Ovid: "Bent qui latui, ben vixit," who lives well hidden, lives well. It was the ultimate stealth mode existence. But why the Dutch Republic? The Netherlands in the 17th century was an absolute anomaly, the heart of the Dutch Golden Age. Following the Union of Utrecht in 1579, a fundamental cornerstone of the nation was the freedom of conscience. This explicitly guaranteed that no citizen would be investigated, persecuted, or executed solely for their private religious beliefs. In an era where Protestants and Catholics were slaughtering each other across Europe, the Dutch Republic became Europe's first functional free speech zone. Between 1600 and 1800, the highly literate Dutch consumed roughly 259 books and pamphlets per 1,000 people every single year, compared to a mere 70 in France. Amsterdam became the publishing capital of the world. Information moved at lightning speed through weekly newspapers called courantos. It was a chaotic, vibrant marketplace of ideas, a fast-moving stream of unregulated information where radical ideas, scientific treatises, and political gossip constantly collided. For a man seeking to observe the world without being dragged into an inquisitor's chamber, it was the perfect place to hide in plain sight. Yet, Descartes was acutely aware that he was walking a tightrope. It was not a perfect secular utopia. The Reformed Calvinist Church still held massive cultural and political sway. If you pushed the boundaries of public discourse too far, the consequences were devastating. Consider the tragic case of Adrian Courbag, a radical thinker loosely associated with Baruch Spinoza, who published a book denying the doctrine of the Trinity and attacking the authority of the Reformed Church. The authorities hunted him down, convicted him of blasphemy, and sentenced him to 10 years in the Raspus, a horrific forced labor prison in Amsterdam. The conditions were so brutal that Courbag died a broken man within a few months. Even Spinoza himself was officially excommunicated and shunned. Descartes knew his own ideas fundamentally threatened established theology by stripping away the magical and mystical elements of nature. He had to self-censor. He had to write strategically. But his intense secrecy was not limited to his intellectual work. He was hiding a massive, deeply personal secret that completely upends the stereotype of Descartes as a cold, unfeeling, calculating machine. Around 1634, while trying to keep a low profile in Amsterdam, he lodged at the house of an English bookseller named Thomas Sargent. There, he encountered a young Dutch domestic servant named Helena Jans van der Stroom. They began an intimate relationship, and in the summer of 1634, Helena gave birth to a little girl named Francine. The social dynamics of the 17th century made this incredibly complicated. Descartes was a French Catholic nobleman. Helena was a working-class Dutch Protestant servant. He could not legally or socially marry her without causing a massive scandal that would draw exactly the kind of attention he was desperately trying to avoid. So, he constructed a deeply compartmentalized double life. He arranged for Helena and Francine to live near him, ensuring they moved whenever he changed towns. But in public, he maintained a strict, heartbreaking fiction. He claimed Helena was merely his servant, and he introduced little Francine as his niece. The psychological burden must have been immense. On one hand, he was formulating the laws of optics and corresponding with the greatest minds of Europe. On the other, he was secretly managing a family in the Dutch countryside, meticulously planning for Francine's education in France. But the universe is relentlessly cruel. In 1640, just weeks before Francine was about to turn 6 years old, she contracted scarlet fever. In the era before antibiotics, it was a terrifying, rapidly progressing, and often fatal disease. Her throat would have been intensely inflamed, her body covered in a harsh red rash, suffering from a soaring fever. Francine succumbed to the illness and died in September 1640. Descartes was utterly, completely shattered. This was the man who actively argued that the human body was nothing more than a biological machine, that flesh, bone, and blood operated identically to the clockwork gears of a watermill. Yet his emotional reaction to the breakdown of his daughter's machine was profoundly human. He wrote to close friends that her death was the greatest sorrow of his entire life. Rejecting the prevailing Stoic expectation that a gentleman should maintain a stiff upper lip and not succumb to base passions, Descartes explicitly wrote that tears and grief do not diminish a man's manhood. He allowed himself to weep openly and deeply for his little girl. This agonizing grief sparked a distinct pivot in his life's work. Prior to 1640, he focused on the mechanics of the physical world: optics, meteors, geometry. After Francine's death, we see a profound shift inward. His later masterpieces, like the Meditations on First Philosophy and The Passions of the Soul, become intensely focused on the nature of human existence, the immortality of the mind, and how we manage emotional suffering. Mechanical philosophy could explain how a fever destroyed Francine's body, but it could not explain the agonizing reality of his own psychological pain. He needed a philosophy that accounted for the soul. This devastating tragedy perfectly contextualizes the bizarre, haunting myth of the mechanical automaton on the ship. The legend was undeniably a myth. No such machine ever existed. It existed because society was trying to process a profound contradiction. The public saw his immense grief, but they also heard terrifying rumors of his radical new physics. The idea that the bodies of humans and animals are just intricate clockwork mechanisms. The public imagination smashed his trauma and his science together. They reasoned, if this genius believes a body is just a machine of gears and springs, and he is paralyzed by the loss of his daughter, the only logical conclusion is that he used his science to rebuild her. But even before Francine's tragic death, Descartes had already suffered a massive, terrifying professional shock. Rewind slightly to the year 1633. Descartes was putting the finishing touches on his magnum opus, a massive manuscript simply titled The World. It was a complete explanation of the physical universe, based purely on his mechanical, mathematical principles. Crucially, at the center of this physics, he explicitly endorsed the Copernican heliocentric model, stating that the Earth was in motion, revolving around the sun. Right as he prepared for the printing presses, news from Italy sent a chill down his spine. Galileo had just been formally condemned by the Roman Catholic Inquisition for teaching that exact same heliocentric theory. The Inquisition crushed Galileo, forcing him under the threat of torture to publicly recant his findings on his knees, banning his books, and placing him under permanent house arrest. Descartes was horrified. A devout Catholic terrified of physical persecution, he wrote a panicked letter to his close friend, Marin Mersenne, a friar in Paris who acted as the hub of the European scientific network. Descartes realized his physics would instantly put him in the crosshairs of the Inquisition. He hit the brakes completely. He suppressed the world, locking the manuscript away in a drawer where it remained unpublished until long after his death. But he still had that divine mandate from the stove room. He waited 4 years and in 1637 published a much shorter, highly strategic book, Discourse on the Method of Rightly Conducting One's Reason and of Seeking Truth in the Sciences. He made a highly subversive decision. He did not write it in Latin, the language of the academic gatekeepers, scholastic theologians, and Jesuits. He wrote it in his native French, aiming directly at the good sense of the common educated public. He was essentially stating that you don't need a degree in Aristotelian logic or theology to understand the universe. You just need your own natural reason. In this discourse, and later expanded in his meditations, he executed the demolition he had dreamed of in Germany. He applied hyperbolic doubt. He decided to aggressively, systematically doubt absolutely everything until he hit a concept that was logically impossible to doubt. If you have an old house with a rotten foundation, you can't just patch the roof. You must tear the entire building down and dig through the sand until your shovel strikes solid, immovable bedrock. So, he started digging. He threw out empirical knowledge, noting that the senses are terrible witnesses. A straight stick plunged into water looks bent. Objects in the distance look small, and people with jaundice see colors differently. If his senses deceived him even once, he could not trust them. Then, he introduced the dream argument. Sitting by his fire, feeling the heat of the flames, he realized he had experienced dreams where he felt the exact same heat and was completely convinced of its reality. There is literally no mathematical or logical way to prove with 100% certainty that you are not in a dream state at this exact moment. Your brain is a master simulator. If you cannot prove you are awake, you cannot trust the physical world exists. To reach the absolute bedrock, he pushed the doubt to its terrifying limit. He introduced the Deus Deceptor, the evil demon. What if there is no physical world? What if a square doesn't have 4 sides? What if an infinitely malicious, incredibly powerful demon is manipulating his mind, injecting false thoughts into his consciousness, making him believe 2 + 2 = 4 when it doesn't? It was the original conceptualization of the Matrix, centuries before computers. He had stripped away everything. No body, no world, no math. He was just a mind falling through an infinite void of absolute doubt. But right at the bottom of that terrifying void, his shovel struck the bedrock. He realized a profound logical necessity. Even if he is being completely deceived by an evil demon, even if every thought is a hallucination, the very fact that he is doubting means there must be a he to experience the deception. You cannot deceive nothingness. The act of doubting is a form of thinking, and there can't be a thought without a thinker. The demon can deceive him about what he is thinking, but it cannot make it such that he is not thinking while he thinks. The conscious mind, the awareness of self, became the first undeniable truth of modern philosophy. He had his bedrock. But establishing that the mind definitively exists created a massive, monumental problem for everything else. If the only thing you are absolutely certain of is your non-physical thinking mind, what about your arms and legs? What about the physical universe? This terrifying logic led directly to Cartesian dualism, which is arguably René Descartes' most consequential and problematic legacy. Descartes concluded that because he could clearly and distinctly conceive of his mind existing without his body, the mind and the body must be 2 completely, entirely separate types of reality. He split the entire universe into 2 distinct substances. On one side, you have res cogitans, the thinking substance. This is the mind, the intellect, the soul. It has no physical size. It has no weight. It takes up zero space and it cannot be divided into pieces. It is purely conscious. On the other side, you have res extensa, extended substance. This is matter, everything physical in the universe. Matter is defined solely by the fact that it takes up space. It has length, width, and depth. It has shape, it moves, and it operates entirely by the blind, mathematical laws of physics. This created a revolutionary, but deeply unsettling view of biology. It meant the human body was nothing more than res extensa. It was a machine. The heart was just a mechanical furnace and a pump. The veins were pipes. The muscles were levers. Fascinated by the complex hydraulic automata in the royal gardens of France, statues that would move and play music when water pressure stepped on a hidden plate, Descartes viewed human biology through that exact lens. He theorized that our nerves are hollow tubes filled with a highly refined, fast-moving fluid he called animal spirits, which flow like hydraulics to inflate our muscles and cause movement. And the implication for animals was incredibly dark. Because animals, in his theological view, did not possess an immortal rational soul, a res cogitans, they were purely machines. He called them beast machines. It is a horrifying concept to modern sensibilities. Descartes literally argued that animals lack consciousness. If you struck a dog and it yelped, Descartes maintained that the dog was not experiencing subjective emotional pain. The yelp was merely the mechanical sound of a programmed reflex, no different than the ringing of a clock when a gear strikes a bell. This cold calculation allowed him and his followers to perform dissections and study biology purely as physics, without an ounce of ethical hesitation. But treating the body as a machine and the mind as a ghost created the most glaring, unsolvable problem in his entire system. If the mind is an invisible, weightless, non-physical ghost, and the body is a heavy, mechanical machine of gears and hydraulic fluid, how on earth do they interact? How does a non-physical thought, I desire to raise my hand, transfer physical momentum to the nerves and muscles to actually move the hand? This is the infamous mind-body problem. And Descartes was brutally pressed on this by one of the most brilliant minds of his era, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. Possessing a razor-sharp intellect, she initiated a correspondence with him, essentially demanding he explain the exact physics of this interaction. If physical motion requires physical contact and extension to push something, how can a soul with no extension push hydraulic animal spirits? She completely cornered him. Descartes' answer was arguably the weakest scientific theory he ever produced. He hypothesized that the interaction between the ghost and the machine happened in a very specific, tiny structure in the center of the brain called the pineal gland. He chose the pineal gland because it is one of the few structures in the brain that isn't duplicated bilaterally. It sits alone in the center. He theorized that the non-physical soul somehow wiggled or vibrated the pineal gland, directing the flow of the animal spirits through the nerve tubes. Even to scientists in the 1640s, this sounded like desperate magic. He hadn't explained how the ghost wiggled the gland. He had just given the magic a specific address in the brain. But the mind-body problem was just an academic debate among elites. The real danger of his physics, the thing that brought the absolute wrath of the theologians down upon his head, was what his mathematics meant for a simple piece of bread. This is where his mechanical philosophy collided violently with deeply entrenched religious dogma over the Eucharist. Following the Council of Trent, the Catholic Church formally codified transubstantiation, relying entirely on Aristotelian scholastic terminology. The doctrine stated that during the Mass, the underlying substance of the bread miraculously transforms into the literal body of Christ, while the accidents, or the species, the outward, physical qualities like smell, taste, texture, and shape, miraculously remain the same. The collision course was immediate. Descartes had just spent his career destroying Aristotle. In Descartes' mechanical universe, there is no such thing as a hidden substance distinct from physical properties. Matter is only its physical extension, its size, shape, and mathematical motion. If you strip away the size, shape, and physical properties of a piece of bread, there is no magical breadness left behind. So, by trying to map the universe with pure geometry, Descartes accidentally made a core religious miracle physically impossible within his own system. Realizing the immense danger, Descartes tried desperately to formulate a workaround to appease the church, writing torturous letters suggesting the mind of Christ could somehow logically inform the surface area of the bread. It was a clumsy, heavily forced explanation that satisfied absolutely no one. The theological backlash was fierce, sustained, and came from all sides. In the Dutch Republic, Protestant theologians were outraged. At the University of Utrecht, a powerful, deeply orthodox Calvinist theologian named Gisbertus Voetius launched a massive coordinated campaign against Descartes, accusing his philosophy of being a backdoor to atheism. Voetius argued that if you reduce the universe to a self-sustaining mechanical clock, you render God entirely unnecessary. The conflict became so bitter that the university officially condemned Cartesian philosophy. On the Catholic side, the prestigious University of Louvain also condemned his work specifically over the Eucharist issue. And the ultimate blow, though it came 13 years after his death in 1663, was when the Pope placed Descartes' works on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the absolute index of prohibited books. By the late 1640s, Descartes was in his 50s. The safe haven of the Netherlands had turned into a toxic battlefield. Exhausted, constantly hounded by theologians like Voetius, and highly paranoid, he desperately needed an escape hatch. It arrived in the form of a royal invitation from the frozen north. Enter Queen Christina of Sweden. At only 22 years old, she was fiercely intelligent, deeply unconventional, and a massive patron of the arts and sciences who wanted to turn Stockholm into the Athens of the North. Initiating a correspondence through Pierre Chanut, the French ambassador in Stockholm, Christina pressed Descartes with intense questions about morality and the passions of the soul. Descartes was flattered but cautious, famously referring to Sweden in a letter as a place of bears and rocks. But the Queen was relentless. She extended a formal invitation, promising to establish a new scientific academy for him to lead. The promise of royal patronage and an escape from the theological wars was too tempting. In October 1649, Descartes packed up his life, loaded a ship with his personal library of 2,000 books, and set sail for Stockholm. It was a catastrophe, almost from the moment his boots touched the docks. Descartes was physically frail, despised the cold, and his entire intellectual process revolved around sleeping until 11 a.m. Queen Christina was an absolute force of nature who required very little sleep, thrived in the freezing climate, and demanded that her private philosophy lessons take place at 5 a.m., in a drafty, unheated Swedish castle library. In the dead of winter, Descartes had to wake up in the pitch black, take a carriage across a freezing bridge, and try to explain the mechanical properties of the soul to an energetic 22-year-old. He was absolutely miserable, writing to a friend, "Men's thoughts are frozen here like the water." Then, the final tragedy unfolded. In early February 1650, Ambassador Pierre Chanut fell critically ill with a severe respiratory infection. Descartes personally acted as Chanut's nurse. Chanute miraculously recovered. But Descartes, exhausted and exposed, contracted the illness on February 2nd. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and on February 11th, 1650, René Descartes died at the age of 53. The official cause of death, recorded by the Queen's physician, Johann van Veulen, was listed as pneumonia. For over 3 centuries, it was a tragic but medically straightforward open and shut case. A frail man, brutal cold, a contagious infection, until 1980. A German medical historian named Eike Bies was digging through dusty archives at the University of Leiden when he stumbled upon a previously unknown, highly detailed letter written by Dr. Johann van Veulen to a colleague back in Holland. This private letter drastically altered the historical picture. Van Veulen detailed 2 very specific, highly troubling anomalies on Descartes' deathbed: hyperpigmentation of the skin, a dark grayish discoloration, and severe hematuria, which is the presence of blood in the urine. These are not standard symptoms of a simple respiratory infection. They are the classic, textbook-defining symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning. Furthermore, the letter detailed violent vomiting, diarrhea, and excruciating abdominal pain. And, most damning of all, when Dr. Van Veulen wanted to perform bloodletting, the standard medical practice for a fever, Descartes vehemently refused, allegedly shouting at the doctor to spare his French blood. Instead, Descartes explicitly requested an emetic, a harsh concoction of wine infused with tobacco, designed to induce violent vomiting. You only ask for a powerful emetic if you suspect you have swallowed something toxic. Descartes, a man who extensively studied medicine and anatomy, believed he was being poisoned. But who had the motive? Queen Christina was the ruler of a fiercely militant Protestant nation, but privately, she was secretly contemplating converting to Catholicism, a move so controversial, it would eventually force her to abdicate her throne entirely. Right in the middle of this explosive theological crisis, a world-famous, persuasive Catholic philosopher arrives and spends hours alone with the Queen every morning. The geopolitical stakes were immense. The leading theory posits that a radical Protestant clergyman or political operative poisoned him with arsenic, nicknamed inheritance powder, because it was common and undetectable, eliminating the Catholic threat while making it look like the natural illness of a frail old man. Without a physical body to test, Descartes' skull was separated from his skeleton and passed around private collections for centuries. It remains a tantalizing, unsolvable, true crime mystery. We will likely never know for certain whether the brutal Swedish winter finally broke his fragile machine, or an assassin's poison ended his life. He died abruptly, in exile, far from the country of his birth. But the ideas he managed to smuggle out conquered the globe. He demolished Aristotelian physics and laid the mathematical tracks for the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and the modern technological world. By making the conscious mind the undeniable center of certainty, he paved the way for modern psychology. By reducing the physical world to pure mathematics, he gave science the tools to build engines and reach the stars. Which leaves us with a massive lingering thought. Descartes reduced the physical body and the brain to nothing more than a biological machine, a complex arrangement of gears and fluid. Today, we are actively building neural networks, artificial intelligence, and massive large language models. We are engineering thinking machines out of silicon and electricity. If Descartes were alive today, looking at AI, would his rigid dualism hold up? Would he be forced to admit that the machine can generate the mind? Or are we, human beings, exactly what he suspected the animals were? Are we just incredibly complex biological automata, exactly like the mythical clockwork robot of his daughter Francine? Just spinning our gears and convincing ourselves we have a soul? That is a lot to think about. If exploring the hidden, mysterious, and controversial lives of history's greatest figures made you think a little differently today, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Legendary Lives Unveiled. We uncover the truth behind the legends so you can understand the people who built our world. Until next time, keep questioning everything.